Oh, hello. This video is about using Charles to create a full backend mocked for a Swift project. Now, there's one bit of this project that I've already done and it's quite difficult to show because of that. But using Charles, you need to set up the iOS simulator. So then you'd have to click that and it will install a certificate on the iOS simulator. You can go to General, About, Certificate Trust Settings, and here I've already got the proxy installed. Sorry, the Charles proxy root certificate installed. I'm going to use Charles, which I only have the trial version of. Shouldn't make too much of a difference within this project. So I'm going to create a new project, nothing particularly special there. So it's going to be a brand new Swift project. So it's going to decode some JSON. Put it in the right folder. And we create our new project. So I'm going to attempt to create a project here, which is going to not use the storyboard. So I'm going to have a view controller, already have it, that's good. I'm going to have a view model. Which is going to be initialized by the view controller. So we'll need an initializer for that. And in fact, to be good citizens, we can have a protocol which the view model will obey. So we're going to initialize a view model, which is going to be of type view model protocol. And we'll have to store it here. So I'll have a private var view model, which will be a view model protocol. So what's here? Oh, we need to have a required initializer. That's fine. I'm only ever going to use this without a storyboard. It would help if I could spell. And it will say I haven't called super. So we need to call the super initializer. There's no nib and no bundle. So that's looking good so far. I want to get rid of the storyboard. So I can just delete that. Move to trash. There'll be two references in the info p list. There's one. There's the other. And there's one around here, main interface. There we go, we delete it from there. Keep Xcode version, of course. So then we need to set up our project properly in the scene delegate. I always find this a bit tricky to remember. So that's going to be our Windows scene, which we're going to return. So we take the UI window with the frame, go create my view model. Go create my view controller. Which is going to accept that view model. Now I usually put everything in the navigation controller. You could just display the view model straight, but I choose not to. So our root view controller is going to be our view controller. Obviously all these names are awful. So that all looks great, but as soon as we load the view controller, we're not going to see anything. And the reason for that is we don't have a view, so it would come up with a blank view and make me worry. So let's create a view. I'm going to give it a black background color. So we should be able to see if this is roughly working or not. I'm expecting to see a red background. Okay, that looks good. We've got the navigation controller. So what we're going to do is try to set up a button and a text view so we can actually see when we download on this view. So what we'll do is we'll set up some lazy variables. Lazy variables only need to be instantiated once. And they're going to be 0 as their frames because we are going to set them up with constraints later. So we need to set these things up. So the button text view are private since they're not part of the public API, but I can also have a private extension for view controller. And in here, we're going to set up our hierarchy, set up our views, and set up constraints. And we're going to need to call each of these in turn because it's very easy to forget doing that. Set up hierarchy, set up views, set up constraints. So that's looking good. So in the hierarchy, I want to add in my button, and I want to add in my view. Now, because I'm taking care of the constraints, I don't want Swift to be doing that for me. So we set the translates auto resizing masking constraints to false. And we're going to need to set up those views. So the button needs to have an action, for example. So the target for the action is here. It's going to be a selector, so it's going to be an Objective-C. Okay, and this is where we're going to call our view model download action. And we'll also have our text view. I want to see a placeholder so I can see where this is before I even try and download anything. And I don't want the user interacting with it, I just want the multi-line text view. Go set up some constraints. So that's going to be in the center of the screen. I'm going to need to set up a width for it. $300 should be okay. And a height of 50 should be easy enough to tap. Now I also want to do some constraint equal to, it's going to be equal to constant. And the same will apply here. So that will be the center of the x-axis. And we don't quite want to do the same with the y because it would be over the button. So we can put 200 above, I guess, or below. Equal to constant, there you go. Wouldn't make sense to have, would make sense to have the constraint equal to the view width. And we can have it 200 tall. Let's see how that looks. Okay, there's something here. Download JSON has a button. Can't see if I'm pressing that or not. Will a breakpoint there help us out? Looks good. And I'll expect my text to appear in here. So in my view model, I need to set up a URL session and actually download something. So the Swift code isn't going to know that it's not using a real network. So what we'll do is set up a URL. I've started thinking about always having constants around. And I prefer to use enums for that. Now I can have whichever address I want here. My website, my backend. So then the URL is going to be optional when we use URL string. So I use a guard statement to make sure we have that. If not, just return. Now, there's always a problem with this in that even when we're using the backend from Charles, that the iOS can cache the responses. So I use your URL session configuration default. Request cache policy will be reload ignoring cache data. Hold on, not quite right. Reload ignoring local cache data. So this will just help us solve a potential little problem later, which we might have had. So which data task do we need? We need with URL, but we need the completion handlers. That one looks good. Which URL are we using? The one we've set up. So data, URL, response, and error. So we're going to need data, URL response, and data in the completion handler. URL session data task is only called when we do a task resume. So we'll do that there so we forget. Definition conflicts with previous value. Which one are we talking about there? Interesting. So let's just take that out, see where this leads us to. Yes, 3 arguments. Not sure what was wrong with my naming. Did I call it URL? Possibly. Is the first one URL response? No, the first one is data. Second one, URL response. Third one, error. And now we're looking okay. So we'll have to deal with those. So data is optional at this point. Let's just confirm that. Data is optional. So I'm going to use a guard statement because if I don't have any data, I'm not that interested in what's going on anymore. And we could just return. And we'll need a decoder. So then we're going to try to decode, use an optional. Now what are we decoding? We're decoding from the data, but we don't at the moment have a type to decode. And we'll have to return the data there. So I'm basically saying this is going to be user. So I'm going to use a user type as my model. So I'll create a struct for that. So name's going to be a string. And each person is going to have a profession. Now this profession itself is going to be an enum string, and these are decodable to be able to be used with that JSON decoder. Now I'm assuming the backend gives us our professions in capital letters, which is fine because I'm going to write that. So I'm pretty sure that's going to be right. And we need this to be readable at some point. So we use custom string convertible. So where it's a doctor, I want to return a nice readable doctor. So if using a default case, I can just explicitly use all the cases. A teacher, return teacher. Okay, placeholder in source file, that's right, because we need this to be user.self. And somehow we're going to have to return our data. So what we're going to do is use a closure for that, to have a nice separation between the view model and view controller. It's going to be optional. Okay. So we're going to return the data by using our closure. And because we're using self, it will give us the message to say using self within a closure. So you probably want to use weak self at that point. Which makes that optional. It's all good. Now in our view controller, we want to call that to download, get network, but we also need to make sure that we have set up the data closure. So the user is going to be of type user. It has a name and profession, so we can actually display that in our text. I like to use string interpolation for this. Name is a. So we put on the second line, user.profession. So this should all run, at least compile. Download JSON, and it's not going to work because we don't have a backend. So what we need to do is use Charles to do that. This is going to get hairy because Charles has probably even closed itself because you only get 30 minutes. Absolutely fine. And that's because I'm using the trial version, and it will also take a few seconds to start. Okay, so the first bit, which is always tricky, is we need to let it enable for that particular site, which is backend.com. We need to enable Ssl Proxying. So that'll be fine. Now we go to rewrite, and I need to add a new set. So what location is that? Well, this is going to be a HTTPS, and just check I did that properly so we don't get the ATS errors. And it's going to be backend.com. By leaving these blank, it will be for any port, path, and query, which is perfect because that's what I want. What do we want to return? Well, we're going to return a body. So the response rather than a request. It's going to be JSON. So what is my JSON type? It's a name and a profession. Okay, so we'll have a name, James, and a profession, which is going to be a doctor. That's one of the two I've put in my enum, so it should work. Click OK. So let's see what happens. We don't need to restart this. We click download JSON and nothing happened. Nice. Shouldn't need to restart the simulator. Interesting. So what's happened here? Response, name, James, profession, doctor. Well, that's good. Have we called get network? Yes, we have. Do we have some data? 41 bytes. That's looking good. Interesting. So what I've often done in the past to debug like this is let the compiler help me out. They help me out at runtime. In profession, have I misspelt name? Have I misspelt profession? Cannot initialize profession from invalid string file doctor. My doctor has to be in capital letters, because of course it does. I wonder if it's one of those things where I said, I definitely will, because I'm doing it. Okay, let's try again. Of course, it's going to decode twice, but... And of course, we've got the classic error. Because in the view controller, I've tried to display on the screen in the text from the background thread. Dispatch queue.main.async. Let's see, and we can get rid of that crazy helpline from the view model. Click download. And James is a doctor. I've got an annoying space there, so I might want to fix that, because after the line. But what's happening is we're getting data from a backend that doesn't exist. So I've used Charles along with Swift to create kind of a working system. What's great about Charles is you can save these rewrite rules, so you can reuse them. So if you're working in a company and you don't yet have a backend but have an API contract, you can still develop the code and you can still make sure that your front end is going to work without waiting for it to be done by someone else in your backend team. Let's see if that works. James is a doctor. Great, good stuff.